welcome everyone. Today we have a special guest with us, someone who doesn't just talk about DevOps, but actually help build the movement itself. He's a co-founder of the DevOps movement and co-founder of a leading Belgian open source consultancy called Inuits, longtime advocate for open source and an all-around tech legend, Kris Buytaert. Kris, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Great. So before we dive into the serious stuff, let's start off with something fun. You've been in the DevOps space for quite some time now, Kris. What's one common misconception people have about you?
About me? Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good one. I think a lot of people think that I don't like certain technologies because I might have been pretty vocal against certain uses of those technologies, where I'm actually sometimes a fan of that technology when it's being used the right way. But what I'm not happy with is when people use tools and when they use tools for the wrong reasons, and when they don't understand why they use a tool and they then do it the wrong way. And then I might be not the best advocate for that tool if people hold it the wrong way, because that's, well, typically wasting their time and effort and resources.
Makes sense. Love that. Yeah, great.
So a lot of people think that I don't like a couple of tools, but typically they're wrong.
Awesome. Thanks for the insight. So DevOps has come a long way since the early days. Before we talk about where it's headed or where it's going now, let's go back to where it all started. So let's rewind back to 2009, Ghent, Belgium. DevOps Days is happening for the first time. Take us back, Kris. What was the problem that you were trying to solve when you founded this movement?
None, actually. Pretty much like Linux kernel. Wasn't something we planned, wasn't something big and fancy we wanted to do. It was basically Patrick and me meeting at Cloud Camp in Antwerp a couple of months before, April 2009. And we were chatting and we were realizing that we had met a lot of similar people, that we had a couple of shared friends, that we had similar but still different backgrounds, and that the experiences and the topics we were talking about and discussing at different events, that if we would bring together the people that we knew, that there would be some fun to be had. And so that's what we did. We said, hey, let's do something. We had no clue what we were going to call the event. Patrick had a venue in Ghent at his office where he was working. We started inviting people, and by the time it was end of October, beginning November, there was about 60, 70 people that were promising us to come to Ghent. And that's when things happened. And then somewhere June, July, I think late June, when Velocity was happening in the US, and Paul Hammond and I'm getting older with names. John Aspel and Paul Hammond were doing the talk at Velocity, 10 deploys a day, devs and up working together. That's when Patrick said, hey, that's a good name. It's going to be about devs and ops, and it's going to be 2 days. So DevOps Days. And that was when things got started. And those 2 days where we were discussing all things. I mean, if it started at a crossroads of open source, people who had 10 plus years of experience deploying and managing and building large-scale open source infrastructures. We were dabbing in the early clouds things. We were building private clouds with tools like Eucalyptus and OpenQRM, and we were adopting Amazon, the very first EC2 thingy. That was the things we were playing with. And there was also a big part of Agile. People who were already Agile practitioners who were already pretty advanced in those topics. And if you mix those three together, that's where all the influences came from.
Nice. And then did you personally ever expect it to grow into the global movement that it is today?
No, absolutely not. I mean, like I just said, we never planned this. It was like a small hobby, project, like bring a bunch of our friends to Ghent and let's learn from each other and get some speakers. And Patrick got a couple of speakers. I got a couple of speakers. And things started happening, and people came back from Ghent and said, hey, this was awesome. Like the open spaces we did in the afternoon, this is where we learned from each other. This is where we really started to understand how other people fix their problems. And we had peer-to-peer discussions with people who had similar topics to discuss, who were in the same mindset, playing with similar ecosystems, with similar problems. So they came back home and I said, hey, this is interesting. John Willis came from the US and said, hey, going back, started talking to Andrew Clay Schaefer, and they did the very first one in the US.
Nice.
Yeah, Lindsay Holmwood, who was speaking about Flatpak and a couple of other tools back then. He went back to Australia, and they did the very first one in Australia the year after. And then things started rolling. And the first couple of years, it was like one event per continent. I mean, Patrick and I were mostly trying to find local teams. Like Hamburg, we were helping out, and then Göteborg the year after, and then Rome I was running. And that was up till 2012, and then 2013, that's when suddenly we had 2 events in London, one in Amsterdam, one in Paris, and pretty much every major city wanted to have their own DevOps days. And then that's when things really exploded.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, today it's become a genre on itself, right? It's become a whole thing of its own. So, looking back, what was the biggest challenge in getting the DevOps movement accepted back then?
Pretty early days, there was a lot of people who thought it was a marketing scam. There was some company who was trying to push something, and they didn't really look at this as something serious. Some commercial companies trying to make it a marketing scam actually were helping there, like trying to edit the Wikipedia page and say, hey, this is our ID. That kind of stuff happened. But that was like not really a big problem. The bigger problem we started facing was that the term DevOps pretty quickly started to lose value, because it started to become like, yeah, this is just system automation. This is just about the automation part, about building pipelines, about doing infrastructure as code. And a lot of recruiters and a lot of companies were saying, yeah, this is a DevOps product. You need a DevOps engineer. And actually, I think we lost that battle pretty early on. I mean, as early as 2012, 2013, people were hiring DevOps engineers. And the question was, so what are you looking for? Are you looking for a Java engineer who can also perform system scaling? Or are you looking for a system engineer who can debug a Java stack trace? And typically when you ask somebody who's hiring a DevOps engineer that question, they go like, we don't know. So that they're hiring somebody, but they don't really know what they're hiring for. And that was a problem. And then we saw organizations who were doing basically, we want a DevOps team. So what do you want then? Well, what they actually wanted was to have a feature team that was end-to-end responsible, which was cross-functional, that could deliver a service, own it, and deliver it. But they called it a DevOps team. And then that was the good implementations. And the bad implementations were they had an ops team, they had a dev team, and now they put a DevOps team in between. And they just made the problem bigger. They just made it worse. And we've seen so many of that. I mean, at the very first DevOps days, we had an open space where we discussed and we said, we're not going to have a manifesto. We saw the Agile movement, and yes, there was a manifesto for the Agile movement, but I mean, I challenge you, go into a random large organization and ask the people there to talk about the Agile manifest. They won't be able to do so, even the Agile coaches. I sometimes do tricks when I do workshops where I actually take the Agile manifest and I put the words in the wrong order. And then people go, yes, we want that. Oh, so you want process over people. And then the next slide, you show them and they go like, oh, that was not the right manifest. So very first DevOps days, the open space, we said no manifesto. In Hamburg, again, we had an open space discussion with a bunch of people saying, nah, let's see what happens. And maybe in hindsight, that was a mistake because we didn't really define what we were talking about. On the other hand, if you look at what DevOps days became, it became that conference where people wanted to go to over and over again. because they were learning from their peers. They got ideas, they had practical hands-on, they came back with a bunch of tools they wanted to play with, not because some marketing company said, hey, you need this tool. No, because their peers were solving real problems with the tools they were interested in. We had talks about how to really use Agile, how to use different flavors of Agile in which use cases, and how to really change organizations. And that's, I think, what really moved the community and the movement forward, while we were still fighting and struggling with, well, we're not DevOps engineers, we're YAML engineers, we're platform engineers, whatever. So that was I think the first challenge we had.
Yep.
Later came a much bigger challenge, naming that a number of tools that came on the market actually widened the gap between developers and operations people. Where in the early days, we were like, okay, so it works on your laptop. And the joke was, okay, let's take your laptop and move it to a data center because all production is not running on your laptop. And the tools that started happening gave developers so much power that they built something really small and they could still throw it over the wall. And now it still was an ops problem, but now at scale. And I've seen organizations that were really working and collaborating together when reached a point where they could deliver quality software at a pretty high pace. And when they switched to those new tools, suddenly that all disappeared again. Suddenly it was the devs built something in their own corner, and then when they figured it was time, that it was good for them, they just threw it over the wall again, and then it was all again back to it's an ops problem now. So we go through these waves where people learn that collaboration helps, and then they move back to their silo and do things again. And it's something that's going to keep on repeating. And the larger challenge is realizing that the tools are not going to solve the problem. We're going to fix problems we fixed 15 years ago and 10 years ago. We're doing that with different tools. But it really is about people working together and collaborating and realizing that the other skill set, the people with the other skill set, because it's not the other team, it's the same team, it's people with another skill set, but would do something different to contribute to the value that you're trying to build. They're not the enemy, they're the people you need to work together with.
Yep. Cool. That was very interesting. I know this is something you're obviously very passionate about, Kris. From your perspective, if you can give us a high level overview of what does a real DevOps culture look like to an organization that's trying to adapt, and what is not a DevOps culture?
So it's a culture where people actually own what they do, where management is there to support, to facilitate, but not to dictate. It starts with being agile. It starts with really being agile, where you have self-organizing teams that own what they build and that take responsibility for that. And that's part of the biggest thing you need. So that doesn't mean that there's top down, somebody saying, hey, we're going to build this. You're going to get 6 months to build this and then you're going to deliver it, because that's waterfall. And that we've known for years now that doesn't work. We're going to deliver software that doesn't work. We're going to not deliver it in time, and we're going to not deliver the features we want. So you want an organization that understands agile. And that's already a challenge, because there's so many organizations that have implemented something that is absolutely not agile, but has an agile name. So people who trust each other, people who collaborate, people who have a common goal, that we're going to build this service for either an internal or an external customer. We're going to keep it up and running. And if we need to do security fixes, if we need to do changes, either functional or something different business-wise, then we're going to make sure that we do that as fast as possible, as stable as possible. And that's the mindset you want. People who want to solve problems, who want to help each other. And then you get to a point where you use automation, you do continuous delivery, you do continuous integration, you have good metrics, you know what's going on, and the tooling is going to help you. And it's typically a pretty open culture. The opposite is a command and control organization with different silos, where you have the network people, the database people, the developers. There's layers and layers of management that are absolutely not knowledgeable anymore about what's really happening, and people are fighting. It means typically there's a lot of downtime in the ecosystems. If you need something to be done, it's going to take weeks rather than hours. People talk to other people through their managers. That's literally the opposite. It's also typically a culture where people say they do something, but they don't really do it. Like they claim to be agile, but they've implemented safe. Like, okay, you're not agile. You've implemented the best implementation of waterfall you can get, but you don't really understand the word agile. So that really is two different worlds.
Makes sense. I've also heard that the term "follow the sun" get thrown around quite a bit in DevOps or anything to do with DevOps. What is your take on the follow the sun model? If you can get us to understand what is that, and what is your personal take on that model? Does it work? Does it not work? Who would it work for?
I haven't heard follow the sun in probably 10 years. Because most organizations that I've worked with don't do that. Follow the sun would typically mean that you have multiple, well, there's two options, I guess. One is where you really have a completely distributed team, which is spread over 24 hours of the time zone. And if that's a small team, typically the two pizza team spread over a 24-hour zone, that's going to be a communication problem. Because that means there's never going to be a time frame when everybody's awake together. So communication-wise, collaboration-wise, it's not really something that I think is going to work. Where I've seen that happen, it was ages ago in really support organizations, where there's always some engineer awake because they have seats in multiple countries on different sides of the planet. In teams that are building and running software, cross-functional and hosting that, I've honestly never seen that work.
That's very interesting you say that. We actually did a webinar with a CTO called Dave McNaught. He used the same principle in his ebook. He essentially said, look, the follow the sun model only works if you're a Google or a Microsoft, right? If you're at that level,
at that scale,
then it will work for you. Otherwise, it's not going to work for a startup or an organization looking to lead, kind of kickstart their DevOps culture. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. Now, if a company is stuck in fake DevOps, Kris, what's one thing they should change first?
Most probably leadership.
Okay.
Because if they're stuck in fake DevOps, if they're stuck in fake Agile, typically that means that leadership has not had the guts to actually do real change, that they've talked the talk but didn't walk the walk, which is what a lot of them do. Yeah, we're going to change the names and the titles and the roles, but fundamentally we're still going to not change anything. So you'll end up doing quarterly releases. You'll end up having long prepare meetings where you decide upfront what you might be wanting to build for the next quarter, with no developer in the room, or maybe one developer, with no ops people in the room. And then you have that 2-3 day offsite meeting, and you come back to the office and say, hey, we decided we're going to build this. You got 6 sprints and you got a bunch of stand-ups, and they call it agile. And if that's what your management does, then they didn't understand the real problem. You can implement all the tools you want. You can implement all the changes you want. But if you don't fundamentally change the way you work, if you don't fundamentally start trusting your developers and give them ownership and responsibility, it's not going to work.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense.
What you'll see is that in a lot of organizations, there are people who want that change. And they either manage to get that change done and manage to convince their peers or their seniors that it really needs to happen. I've seen a couple of cases where it actually started helping after a near-death experience. Like when an organization has a significant outage, which loses them potentially a lot of money, where they actually are in a lot of pain. that could be a trigger for senior management to say, oh, wait, we really need to change. On the other hand, I've also seen situations where senior management at that point said, oh, no, we need to completely lock down everything. We need to gate everything, and we need to make sure that nobody can get anything through production except if we've manually approved things, which is literally the opposite of what you want to do, because you have actually increased your risk rather than reducing your risk. It takes people that understand that continuous delivery is about reducing risk. Continuous delivery is about constantly making small incremental changes where you know that the last change you did yesterday at 3 p.m. is the bug that broke things. And it's not one of those 36 changes that we piled onto a big blob that somebody built over the last 3 months and we put in production yesterday, because you have no clue which change of those 3 months of development it was. And once senior management understands that the small incremental changes are much less risky than that one big change every quarter, then you can start making changes.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, if anything goes wrong in that quarterly release, then you essentially start from scratch. Whereas if you're actually adapting a true DevOps mindset, then that you know where exactly things went wrong and you can quickly go and fix it. So I know that the DevOps space or DevOps culture itself is also evolving currently, obviously with AI emerging and the new emerging trends within automation. These things are also being integrated into DevOps. Are we headed towards a no ops kind of movement, or is that just a marketing hype?
No ops to me has always been a marketing hype by people who never understood ops.
Cool. That's a good takeaway. Okay, and what about things such as platform engineering? So we're also hearing this term used quite a bit. Do you think it's just a rebrand of DevOps, or is it something new?
Yeah, to me, it's absolutely a rebrand. I'm actually heading to Tokyo in a couple of weeks where I'm going to do a talk about 10 years of experience with platform engineering, because what we did was we basically gave developers self-service platforms where they could spin up whatever they wanted. 10 years. We did that more than 10 years ago. Of course, things have evolved. Now they got portals and they don't need to do the API call and things like that. But to me, there's been a couple of flavors over the past couple of years. We've had things like Google's SRE movement, which was Google's implementation of how they collaborated. We've had the Spotify module, which was at some point the documentation how Spotify at that level of their maturity solved their specific problems, which worked for them. And people started copying those models, but that never worked because they didn't have the same problems and they didn't have the same maturity that Spotify at that moment had. So people we're doing the Spotify model, we're going to do the SRE model, we're going to do whatever. And to me, platform engineering is there's two approaches to that. If you have a small operations team and a lot of different developers and development platforms that you need to support, then what you need to do is you need to standardize. You need to give them frictionless platforms that they can consume, where they can deploy and which they can use fast, and you give them some guardrails, and that's what you're going to do. And that's one implementation of platform engineering. The other one is when you are so big that you want to standardize, that you cannot afford for every organization, every part of your organization to actually say, we're going to do this thing, this thing, this thing. So at some point, you're going to build a platform. Different teams are going to have different maturity. There's going to be developers where you really need those guardrails and say, hey, this is what you can build. We give you all the basic components, use them. This is the platform you get built on top of that. And some teams are going to be much more mature and going to say, hey, we can run this stuff ourselves. We are capable. And you'll see that startups, software as a service companies, they typically are capable of hiring the people that can say, hey, we can own this, we can run this, we can do this for ourselves. But large corporates, the maturity of the developers they have has a huge variety. There's going to be really good people in there, but there's also going to be people in there that are just, it's their day job, they do what they want, and they need much more guardrails. They won't be able to take that ownership. They won't be able to do those fancy things that SaaS startup is going to do because, well, there's a different skill set. So to me, platform engineering is at two sides of the spectrum, a way to facilitate other teams.
Okay.
It's a way of collaborating with each other. And even to take it a step further, I'm much more like the term platform engineer as a job description than a DevOps engineer, because it actually tells what those people are doing. They're supporting, they're building a self-service platform that people can consume, and their task is to keep that up and running so other people can actually build on top of that. Whereas if you're a DevOps engineer, what are you doing? Yeah, you might be building a platform. You might be helping people to automate everything that they are going to need to consume. But you don't know. You could also be just on call and debugging things. Or you could be an SRE who's not empowered to tell to a development team that, hey, your error rate, your budget is over. Stop deploying things and fix your stuff first. So in that way, like, I really like that a platform engineer is actually a better description of what a lot of people are doing than a DevOps engineer.
Yeah, makes sense. At least it gives you a bit of clarity into the function of what that engineer actually does.
But to me, it is an implementation. And one that makes sense for a lot of organizations, but not for every organization.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. And another big area within this space is also observability as well. How do you see it shaping the future of DevOps?
So within Inuit, we started a spin-off called Ollie like 2.5, 3 years ago, was focusing on open source observability. The fundamental problem that I've been running into with most of the customers we deal with is their monitoring is still broken. They want to jump to observability, but they're blind already. They don't have the basics in place. They don't even see a service that goes down, or they see it way too late. Or by the time the alert reaches the team, it's 2-3 hours further. And that is not normal. That is something you need to fix first.
Yeah.
It also comes down to they've not automated the right way. They have not built a single source of truth. They've had so many diverse systems that they maybe have a couple of multiple sources of maybe, but they don't have a single source of truth. So their monitoring cannot be in sync with what's reality. Things are being decommissioned and nobody gets stalled. Monitoring is manual. So that's the first barrier already. I mean, observability, everybody's talking about it. We need to do it. We have to do it. But the monitoring is broken. There's no good logs. There's no good metrics, and the alerts are broken. Let's start with that. So once you get that in place, then you can start looking into, hey, I mean, lots of people talk about the 3 pillars of observability. I like to put it as different layers, and growing in maturity, fixing your monitoring is the first step. But once you get to that higher level, there's a bunch of really cool open source tools that you can use to really dig into your system, really learn how they behave and learn from each other. But we've got good successes with a bunch of tools. We helped a bunch of teams to actually learn how their platforms behave, learn how the platforms not behave at certain points.
Yeah.
But it takes time. I mean, you need to get to a point where your monitoring is good, and then you can start investing in the observability. And then it takes time to actually build data sets that are relevant, that are good quality, so you can see the anomalies. And there's not a lot of organizations that get to the level where it becomes useful for them. And that's a challenge. It's partially a cultural challenge in a way that people that are responsible for the service they deliver, they want to see how things behave. So the higher their maturity is, the easier and the faster they're going to adopt these tools, because they're going to care. But if you're on the other side of the spectrum, where management top down has said, hey, you're going to build this, and they have no input, they don't have the feeling about what they're building, they don't even have access to production sometimes. Those teams are not going to get to a point where monitoring is good and where observability is a primary target, because, well, quite frankly, they don't care.
How are you going to observe and monitor something when you frankly don't even know what you're building, right? Okay, so you've been a huge advocate for open source for quite a few years now. Why is open source so important to the DevOps movement?
A lot of the discussions end up being, but you're doing open source because of the licenses. And no, that's not the reason. The reason why I think open source is the important part, is exactly the culture part.
Okay.
If you look at people who dab their feet into open source communities, it's the people who want to understand how things work, who want to contribute, who want to create better software and improve the quality of that software. And if you have that kind of engineers in your team, it's the ones who are going to see, hey, there's a problem here. Let's start looking at what the problem is. Let's start figuring out if we can fix it. Let's debug it. We've seen where the problem is. Let's solve the problem and take the step forward. It's an engineering culture. On the other side of the spectrum, there is the commercial off-the-shelf software where somebody has decided we're going to buy this package. Somebody gets the instructions, hey, install this package and use this package.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a completely different type of people there. I mean, if something breaks there, they're not going to debug into that system. No, what they're going to do is they're going to take their phone or going to a support platform and say, hey, vendor, I've got this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to say to their manager, hey, I filed a ticket with the vendor. It's not my problem anymore.
Yeah.
And I might be exaggerating a bit, but in a lot of organizations, that is exactly what people have done.
Yeah.
They filed the ticket with the upstream vendor and they have solved the problem for them now. Whether that problem is really solved, probably not, but it's going to take a couple of days. They're going to wait till get feedback. And it's going to take some time before they really fix the problem. But they've done their job. It's not their responsibility anymore. They've done what they should be doing.
I think it just goes against the whole idea of DevOps, or what you're trying to achieve from an actual DevOps culture, right? And I think it goes beyond DevOps. The main point of a skilled engineer or engineering itself is innovation and problem solving. And taking this route just completely is counterproductive to actually being innovative and solving the problem.
And you see that the people who come out of an open source ecosystem are going to be much more eager to be engineers, whereas people who've been told to, hey, buy this product and do this, it's a different culture. It's a different approach of, there's typically less passion, less involvement, less we want to build this and be proud about what we built.
Yeah. And I agree with that.
That is where we say it is about that culture part, and open source is part of that culture. The other part is it's about open standards, about typically ages ago, automating products, open source products were much easier to automate. Proprietary products, well, there was a user interface, you could click into it, and that's where it stopped. So we couldn't automate it because those vendors were actively trying to prevent people from doing so.
Mm-hmm.
It's slowly improving, but still different.
Okay. And for engineers out there who love DevOps but haven't been or haven't contributed to open source yet, or haven't had the chance to contribute to open source yet, what would be your advice that you could give to them?
Start small, like figure out if there's maybe some documentation that's missing. There 25 years ago, I started writing how-tos of the tools that I really like to use. I started writing the documentation. Then you start doing small patches. It's not only about the people who write code, because that's typically a large misconception that you can only be involved if you are building software, if you're writing software, if you know certain languages. There's so much more to be done. Talking about your experiences, sharing your experiences, but also fixing small bugs and packaging things, and that also helps.
Yeah, awesome.
So try to find a project that you love and then figure out if they need help in some way. Sometimes on their homepages you can find like a list of, hey, these are easy tasks. Somebody picks them up.
Nice. Are there any specific open source projects that you're particularly excited about right now?
We mentioned observability. I really like CodeRoot the last couple of months. It's really a nice open source observability tool. It has helped me tremendously with debugging a couple of platforms. So I'm definitely keen on using that. That's one of my favorite ones at the moment. Nice. But apart from that, there's so much stuff going on.
Yeah, definitely. This space is something to definitely watch out for. All right, Kris. I mean, we've covered a lot today. DevOps origins, real DevOps culture, emerging trends, why open source is the way to go. Before we wrap the interview up, what's one DevOps principle you think that every company should adopt right now?
I think everybody should really consider doing real continuous delivery. If they're running software and hosting services, and if software is what they're actually giving as a service to internal or external parties. Because I cannot imagine doing it another way anymore. I've seen that platforms are much more stable, they're much more healthy. And if the platforms are much more stable, then also the teams involved are much more stable. I mean, the difference between having a well-designed infrastructure where people practice continuous delivery, where monitoring is tightly integrated, and where the on-call people want to be on call because, well, they're never being paged because things just work.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that's been built together manually, that doesn't scale, that's not stable, where basically people are on call because, yeah, we get so many bonus hours a week and we are being paid, but we don't really like it because we don't sleep at night.
Yeah.
It's so different.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's one of the biggest reasons why engineers then burn out and sometimes just move away from engineering as well. So yeah, that I definitely agree with that. Final question, then this is a fun one as well. If DevOps had a theme song, what would that song be?
There's been people who actually made songs, and I'm trying to remember one of them. I think it was David Lutz at DevOps Days Mountain View 2012. I'll share it with you later. It's somewhere recorded, but I'm totally forgetting the title. But that was just.
I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to hearing that
a couple of times. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I will definitely have a look at it. And what we can do is we can also share that as well, so people can have a look. Kris, this was awesome. Where can people follow you and keep the conversation going? Specifically, is there any links you can share?
There's basically following is probably. I'm mostly active on both Mastodon and Blue Sky. Drop most of the other ones. LinkedIn only for people that I really know to keep my network. But people can follow me there, but I don't post a lot on LinkedIn. But mostly on Mastodon and Blue Sky is where I'm at, and typically usernames just Kris Buytaert.
Nice. Okay, great. So I'll get all those links across from you as well, and then we link all of that down there. Massive thanks for sharing your insights. I've really enjoyed this. I'm sure our viewers will also really enjoy this as well. So yeah, to anyone who's listening or watching, don't forget to like and share, and stay tuned for more DevOps conversations.